Hi Year 11, I'm going to be going through the poem Coming by Philip Larkin for your exam. So let's start with the title first of all, the verb coming, suggesting that something is being foreshadowed, something might be arriving. And if we know the poet Philip Larkin, we know that he often talks about quite ordinary life events, and he's often quite interested in life and death. And often his poems can be quite depressing and quite realistic. And as you can see, this is a very short poem, and I have added in some lines here to split it up, which I'll talk about a little bit later. However, there are no stanzas, there's just one singular stanza here. So that could show, if we're going to talk about structure, how whatever he's about to talk about that is coming, it's quite continuous and that there are no breaks whatsoever. And that could be a good thing, it could be a negative thing, it depends what your interpretation is. So let's read what he is talking about. On longer evenings, light, chill and yellow bathes the serene foreheads of houses. So the first image we have here is longer evenings. So here we can see that there's a season change, spring or summer is arriving, and perhaps that is the thing that is coming. Light, chill and yellow bathes the serene foreheads of houses. So here we have the description of light with these two adjectives being chill and yellow. So again, obviously very peaceful adjectives, a very calm image being created. And then we have the verb here of the light bathing the serene foreheads of houses. So bathing, again, being something very peaceful, calming. And this is the light bathing the houses. So the light is being personified again, and so the light is giving these houses some kind of peace or calm or comfort. And we also have that word serene here, which just adds and emphasizes to that image. We do have a slightly strange word added in with Larkin, which changes the description and the image slightly. We have foreheads of houses rather than facades of houses. So the houses are even given some human features, so they're being personified as well. And that could be for a number of reasons. You could see it in a positive way, that these houses are filled with humans and filled with life and emotion. Or you could see it in a negative way, that the foreheads are harsh or hardy, and that completely contrasts this light that's chill and yellow and serene. And so if you could talk about both those interpretations, that is where you might get your top marks. Okay, and then I've drawn a line here because the topic changes slightly, so I guess you could say there's a slight pivot here. And we move to a thrush singing. So we've gone from light to a thrush singing, which is a bird in a garden. And we've got laurel surrounded in the deep, bare garden, its fresh, peeled voice, astonishing the brickwork. Okay, so again, we've got more about nature soothing and helping human and man-made things. So laurel surrounded, meaning that this garden is surrounded by greenery. And then we have in the deep, bare garden. So we have a slight contrast here, because here we have an image of life and nature, and then we have this deep, bare garden. So we have this image of winter here, which is quite interesting. Its fresh peeled voice astonishing the brickwork. So we go back to the bird, and Larkin describes its voice as fresh peeled. So again, that could link to the season of spring, of things being born or rebirth. And we have this verb here, astonishing, which is quite powerful because the bird's song is astonishing the brickwork of perhaps the house next to this garden. So again, we have nature calming and soothing man-made things. So we've got calming man or calming humans. And astonishing, the connotations of that suggesting that perhaps the house is mesmerized by this bird song, again personifying it because it can't be astonished by it. And so both the light and the bird, surprise, and create overwhelming feelings for these man-made things. Okay, and then we have a change again, a slight pivot. It will be spring soon, it will be spring soon. So we have the anaphora here. And we're not sure at this point who is speaking. We're never told, but we have this repetition which really just emphasizes whoever is speaking is wanting and desiring the spring to come perhaps sooner. And that links to the bare garden and perhaps a very cold and dark winter. And it seems almost like a childish wish, perhaps, and that makes sense if we read on where Larkin goes to his narrator for the first time and talks about their childhood. So we change again, and we have our first person introduced. And again, it's quite interesting that has been completely delayed, and this is almost halfway through the poem. And so we've talked about light, we've talked about the bird, we've talked about the garden, and then we have and I. So perhaps this human talking could be seen as secondary, not as important as the light and the birds and the spring. And I, whose childhood is a forgotten boredom, feel like a child who comes on a scene of adult reconciling and can understand nothing and the unusual laughter and starts to be happy. Okay, so let's break this down slightly. So, and I, whose childhood is a forgotten boredom. Okay, so here we can see that the speaker is perhaps now an adult, as his childhood is simply forgotten. So we have a link to memory here, and it's a forgotten boredom. So that image there completely contrasts the beauty and the life that has been introduced to us from the nature of the light and the thrush singing. And I feel like a child who comes on a scene of adult reconciling. So this nature again has a different effect. It has had an effect on the houses and on the brickwork, and now it affects our narrator and it makes them feel like a child. So we can assume that it might bring happiness and joy, that of a child. And this child is coming on a scene of adult reconciling, so a slightly confusing term there. And that means that it's the feeling a child has when they perhaps enter a room and two adults are making up after an argument, and the child can understand nothing but the unusual laughter and starts to be happy. So perhaps here we have the link between nature and perhaps the naivety of a child and their happiness, because the child understands nothing, but the laughter of their perhaps parents allows them to be happy anyway. So it could be seen as positive. The nature itself is making this person happy, and there's no real reason why. So there's a lack of reason linked with nature and making it happy. Or it could perhaps be slightly more negative. And if we know Larkin, we know that might be the case. The unusual laughter and starts to be happy. This child doesn't understand anything, so they are quite naive, and yet they're happy for no particular reason. So perhaps in a more negative sense, Larkin is saying that this light and this bird and the beginning of spring brings happiness for no real reason, that it's not really something to be happy about. But that's perhaps a more negative way of looking at it. Okay, so if you had this in your GCSE, you may get a question which is something like explore the thoughts and feelings, and it might leave it as that, and it might be quite vague, or it might be explore the thoughts and feelings about the coming of spring or of the narrator. And that's quite easy to answer because, as I've just shown you, the poem kind of splits up its change in emotion quite easily in its thoughts and feelings. So here you obviously have happiness and peace, at the beginning of it, and that does continue throughout. But here you also have a sense of a lack of something. You also have a sense of being mesmerized by nature. You have here in the middle this kind of wanting need from whoever is speaking, an anticipation for the spring that's coming. And then finally, you have a slightly more confusing emotion to talk about, of a child who understands nothing but laughter and starts to be happy. So of course you can talk about how nature brings happiness, but you might also talk about the confusing emotion that this child has at the end, and the happiness that is brought to them but without particular reason. So if I was you, I would then write kind of those 3 or 4 points, match up my quotations, and then that would make a perfect essay.